we've had a little shuffle. We've changed my glasses so it's visually distinct from part 1. If you haven't seen part 1, please do go and watch part 1, though we will blast through the vast majority, like not the vast, the highlights of what I covered in part 1 here just now before I start my part 2. And if you don't know, if you haven't read the title, this is How to Write Disabled Characters and Why You Should Anyway. I'll have to come up with a better title than that for part 2. Part 2. In part 1, we discussed why you should listen to me, which includes I have intersecting complex physical disabilities and also a specific learning disability, which is dyslexia. And no, I will not tell you what physical disabilities I have because it's private medical information and it's my personal business and I don't want to. I get to create that boundary and I have. I also explained some of the why you might want to write disabled characters, including no statistics, because I think that sometimes we rely too heavily on statistics and I think sometimes they make less of an impact because of that. And I also talked about how, like, basically the reason that you might want to include disabled characters is because disabled people exist. Wow. But also causing your character to become disabled over the course of a narrative can be really impactful, especially something that's quite like hardcore epic kind of narrative can be really impactful because it can really clarify like how high the stakes actually are. Like you can't come out the other side unscathed, as it were. Like the situations that they end up in have a real tangible impact upon them. I'm not saying you have to do it. I'm not saying you have to do it every time or regularly or ever if you don't want to, but like it can be an interesting dynamic to consider or cover. Then I gave 3 examples of well-written or well-crafted disabled characters that range the spectrum from their disability impacts and affects everything, including the plot of the narrative, through their disability only seems to impact them at inopportune moments, all the way through to their disability doesn't impact them most of the time, but it is still a notable and included disability. Then I went through some perils and pitfalls and some of the potential solutions to those perils and pitfalls, including, for example, forgetting that your character is disabled or letting your readers forget the character is disabled, or not having a clear enough understanding for yourself and your readers as to what the character's disability is and how it affects them, and how you can not do that. And now I have what I had labeled to be in my original video as final notes, which I'll be honest, it's a lot. Which is why I split these videos into 2. So again, if you haven't seen book 1, if you haven't seen video 1, I highly recommend you go and watch it. It's literally the last video that I did. I'm wearing exactly the same shirt and I'm in exactly the same place. Well, slightly tilted because I had to move because I have a physical disability. I can't sit in one place for a really long period of time without ending up hurting myself or like flaring up my disability. So I had to shuffle and now we're here. The reason I swapped glasses is purely for aesthetic, by the way. If you're looking at that last video and going, your glasses are different. Yeah, it's purely for aesthetic. I have 2 pairs of glasses now and I am jazzed about having 2 pairs of glasses. So you will see them swap between these ones and the star ones. Any previous glasses that you've seen me wear, they're old and out of date now because you need to update your prescriptions sometimes. Although these ones are annoying because they're slightly too big for my face and this keeps happening, which is annoying because I have to sit here or I can't see. Or I can't see far enough away. Anyway, the first point on my list of points is entitled Making Accessibility because I've made them as like very much as notes. I'm sorry, I have dog hair all over my face because it's really hot, which is why I'm not in my office. But obviously it's very sticky when it's hot. I have a dog, his name is Porthos, and if you can hear any snoring during the course of this video, it's because he's underneath you right now. The tripod, not you personally. He didn't sneak into your house. Anyway, also if you can see white hair on my shirt, that's Achilles' hair. I introduced him at the end of June. He is our newest addition to the household. Anyway, the point is that making accessibility is kind of my counter to... So I raised this discussion point in the last video where I talked about how people ask the question of why include disabled characters in sci-fi and fantasy. Why wouldn't in sci-fi and fantasy, when you've got magical or like sci-fi level healing, why wouldn't you just heal people of all their disabilities and not have any disabilities at all? That is a conversation that comes up a lot, especially in sci-fi, but it does come up a lot in fantasy and particularly in tabletop role-playing game communities a lot. And I will warn you now, that is generally speaking an ableist conversation, right? But my generous heart is willing to address that conversation from a really genuine perspective, right? What if that is coming from the perspective of, I can't imagine being happy being disabled. That sounds really bad, actually, when I say it like that. I can imagine being happy being disabled. You know those people, there are people, please never do this, by the way. There are people who say, when they find out that you're disabled, I could never. And it's like, do you think I opted in? Do you think I went, do you know what sounds like a fun time? Because that's not generally how this works. But if I'm being really genuine, I think it comes from a really I think it can come from a really it can come from a really genuine place, and a place of surely if you could get rid of that pain forever, surely you would want to. And I see how that makes a level of sense. But the reality is, as I said in the previous one, people are disabled, and the vast majority of us are not looking down the scope of any cure, impending cures. We're not looking at it going, ooh, just a little bit more research and I'll be all better. That's not, I'm gonna say, likely for most people, possible for some people. Again, I was born with my disability. It's a genetic condition. My parents gave it to me. They don't have it, but they gave it to me. And it's just one of those things. I'm okay with it. I feel neutral most of the time about my disability. It is what it is. Them's the shakes. And that's okay. And it's nice to see people like me represented in fiction, because I'm not getting a cure. I'm not going to magically be better. So why wouldn't I want to be reflected in fiction? And it's the thing of, are you creating an idealized world, or are you reflecting some elements of the world we live in? Is this an allegorical narrative? Are you trying to make something completely separate from the world that we live in? Are you just being ableist because you don't want to think about disability because it makes you uncomfortable? But the point of making accessibility is, a lot of the time that conversation comes with the subsequent, especially in tabletop role-playing communities, where it comes with the subsequent thing of the villain isn't going to make their lair accessible for a disabled hero. So how does that work? And it's you have answered your own question, you just don't realize you've answered your own question. You've said, in a fantasy or sci-fi universe where you can have magical or super duper scientific healing, why would you not heal a person? And why would you not make accessibility a thing that a person can have, right? And again, I'm not saying infrastructure-based accessibility. I'm not saying, haha, everywhere else is accessible, but somehow the villain got stairs. I'm saying, if your main character or one of your core characters is in a wheelchair, one of your core hero group is in a wheelchair, and they're going to the villain's lair, and the villain's lair has stairs, why can they not have a wheelchair that is capable of doing things that a current real life wheelchair wouldn't be able to do? The vast majority of people I know that use wheelchairs for any length of time would love a wheelchair that's able to do extra stuff. A wheelchair that's able to climb stairs and descend stairs. Both of those are two separate things and they're important. A wheelchair that's able to climb a mountain with another person and not, roll straight back down the mountain. A wheelchair that's able to do things that current real life wheelchairs are not able to do. And if you're writing a sci-fi or fantasy world where sci-fi and fantasy things exist in it, Why can you not have that? Why could you not have a wheelchair that's capable of doing these things? Why could you not have, like, oh, instead of a wheelchair, we're in a sci-fi universe, let's make like a chair with like ambulatory legs, like a spider chair, that can climb stuff, or a hover chair that can like hover up and down the stairs. And then you open this whole avenue of world building of, okay, would a spider chair be able to do all of the things that a spider's legs can do? Like, some spiders, and I'm so sorry if you have arachnophobia, some spiders can walk on water. Could a spider chair walk on water? Some, like, if you've got a hover wheelchair, could your hover wheelchair, it can go up and down the stairs, can it hover over water? If the answer is no, that's interesting. If the answer is no, but it can do stairs because it can only hover over solid ground, does that mean, or do like short jumps, like you could jump a stream in it, does that mean it could hover over lava and magma? Would that count this wheelchair's sensors or magical sensors as solid ground or as liquid? Interesting, especially if you decide to put your villain's lair in a volcano, as they so often are, with a pit of lava, magma, whatever, between the hero and the villain. And the villain's like, there's no way you can get over this. And the one person in the crew who's in a wheelchair is like, I can. Isn't that an interesting world building thing? Doesn't that allow you a bunch of possibilities? And again, as the author, you personally get to decide whether the answer is yes or no. You get to decide whether it fits the narrative that you want to tell better if the person who is in a wheelchair can cross that lava magma or cannot. If Legolas in Lord of the Rings can walk on top of the snow, I think we could make a wheelchair also capable of doing that. Right? There's so many possibilities open to us in the avenues of sci-fi and fantasy to make personal mobility devices more able, more able to access things, even if the infrastructure hasn't changed. Or the possibility that you can change the infrastructure and change the assistive devices and the mobility tech to be able to handle when things aren't accessible, because you can't make a mountain more accessible, right? That's not a thing you can, well, you could put a road on it, I suppose, but like, that's not really a thing you can do. But if you've got a mountain climbing wheelchair, suddenly you're able to climb that mountain. And it does annoy me. I'll admit, I do get annoyed with these conversations because I'm there like, obviously the answer to the question is include disabled people because disabled people exist. That's why they're there. And you just said you could use magic or tech to be able to heal these disabilities. Why can you not therefore extrapolate that you could use magic or tech to fix the problems that disabled people face that aren't specifically their disability? The things that are the barrier between this disabled person and being able to do the things they want to do. It's not the disability getting in the way. But conceptually, it's not the disability getting in the way, it's the infrastructure. It's what assistive devices are currently capable of doing. And it's so interesting to come up with cool new stuff in your world building, rather than just not letting anybody be disabled. And like, I'll admit, I didn't exactly do the best job of this in Mary Ellen Breaking the Curse, which is my first book ever that came out in October 2021. I didn't do a brilliant job of making it inclusive and accessible. But I kind of fixed that in book 2 because I included a wheelchair user in book 2, and I realised that I'd made this sort of medieval castle aesthetic that a lot of like high fantasy has. And I realised that I hadn't made it accessible, and I was like, what am I going to do now? So all I did was, because it's a world with magic, I just made all the stairs enchanted to be able to carry wheelchairs up and down them. Because, hey, guess what? I can do that. It's not a real world. It doesn't matter if that would be possible here. Thing number 2 on my list is to address curing narratives. So a curing narrative is a narrative where a character gets cured. There are usually 3 formats to this. Number 1 is the quest is to cure the disability. Like, that's the whole point. That's what they're doing from the very beginning. This is the least dangerous of these narratives. Going on a quest specifically to cure a disability is a thing. We don't always love it because a lot of the time the implication is that being disabled is bad and getting a cure is the only solution. But it is what it is. And I think this is, by my reckoning, this is the least damaging, because at least when you go in, you know from the beginning what you're getting into. They're trying to find a cure. Them's the shakes. And they're probably going to find one by the end of the book. Although sometimes in those kinds of narratives, you spend the whole time looking for this cure and you realise that actually it's not as bad as you thought it was. Or like you come to terms with the disability, which is, you know, whatever. I don't write either of these kinds of books, just FYI. My books very much do not involve cures, searching for cures, or coming to terms with things. That's not what I do. So anyway, the second one is incidentally finding a cure over the course of the narrative. So like you're on a quest for something else, you find a cure for the disability, and you then get to decide, the character then gets to decide whether they want to use it or not. And that becomes like a conversation, a thought process. And a lot of the time that can be done quite well if the character really thinks about the value and like the value of getting rid of their disability versus like learning how to exist in a non-disabled body. Because a lot of people, especially able-bodied people, don't understand that it would be very different. Like if you've got used to living in a disabled body, suddenly swapping into an able body would be really weird and really difficult, because you'd have to relearn how to do so many things. You wouldn't instinctively know how to exist in an able body. You would have to learn how to exist in an able body. If you haven't, for example, if you have been paralyzed, like, what's it called? If you have leg paralysis and you use a wheelchair for that, you wouldn't instinctively know how to use your legs. A magical cure or a fancy sci-fi cure wouldn't necessarily give you the knowledge of how to do that. You would still have to go through months or years of physiotherapy to build back up muscle in your legs, to be able to handle like them holding you. Like people have it where they have these miracle spinal surgeries, right? I'm saying miracle because that's what they call them. They have these spinal surgeries. If it works, it allows them the access, the use of their legs again. Not everyone can have this. Some people can. And they still have to go through months or years of physio to get to a point where walking is an option. And sometimes it's not something they can do not long term. That's not what I mean. Like, it's not something they can do the way that a person who never was paralyzed in any capacity could do. Like, also think about this. If you've lost a limb in a battle, or you were born with a limb difference, but I imagine, like, I really wouldn't go for born with a limb difference getting cured, because that's a whole conversation that I'm not really a relevant party in. But from my understanding and talking to people who do have limb differences, that's really inappropriate. But if you lost a limb, like Edward Elric, and you find a magical cure to grow back your limb, is that going to hurt though? Is that going to be a pleasant experience while you're in the process of growing back a limb? These are the questions. These are important questions. And then finally, the third narrative is the getting a cure as a reward for having done the quest, right? And this one is the one that's the most like slap in the face to a lot of us disabled people. But to a lot of us, that is a real slap in the face, because it's very, very sudden and it's very, very unexpected, right? And it is so common in children's narratives, which is by itself quite damaging. Because if you are a disabled child, or you are a child who's first learning about disability through this lens, and at the end of the quest, the disabled child suddenly gets to stand back up and walk around. I'm saying stand back up and walk around. I'm fully playing into the disabled people that are in wheelchairs trope right now, which is not necessarily how this works. I mean, I'm literally sitting on a sofa and I could leg, right? Like, I'm not paralyzed, is what I'm saying. The point is that like they can be cured of their disability at the end, and if they were like well behaved enough, if they did a good enough job with the quest. And it's really damaging for a lot of children to get this narrative, and it is so common in children's narratives, because the damaging part is creates in the mind of a child, because a child is still learning about the world, and if this is their first interaction with disability or their main interaction with disability, it creates this idea that to be able-bodied is to be good, and to be disabled is to be not good enough, right? It creates this ableist ideology that disability is some kind of punishment, or that the way to become non-disabled is to be well-behaved, obedient, kind, and, you know, all of these things that we are trying to teach, by and large, children to be. I mean, obedient is a bit of a difficult one, but like, by and large, we're trying to teach children that they should be kind, and they should be polite, and they should be, you know, nice. They should share, they should, you know, all of this stuff that we're trying to teach children generally. But the idea that the reward for that, for disabled children, is getting to not be disabled anymore is very damaging, both in the mind of a disabled child and in the mind of an able-bodied child who might make disabled friends at some point. I'm not saying you can never make these narratives. I'm saying they're a risky narrative to make. All of the cure narratives are, by and large, quite risky, because there is a large camp of disabled people who will hunt you down. No, there's a large camp of disabled people who don't like them. Because, for exactly the same reasons that we don't like, oh, nobody's disabled in my narrative, because magic exists in it, and therefore everybody gets healed. It's the same ableist logic behind the cure, especially the cure is a reward, but in general, behind the cure. Because it's like you've been with this character through all of their trouble and torment, right? Through all of their difficulty, you have been right there with them. And they are like you in this really core, fundamental way. They experience, for example, they experience pain. They experience ableism. They experience the inability to access things. Inaccessibility, that's the word I'm looking for. Because of this piece of them that other people don't seem to like. And it is annoying, right? You are with them through needing help with things other people don't need help with. You are with them when they need someone to take care of them. You are with them for all of those troubles that you have as a disabled person, that they have as a character, while they go on their quest. And then, at the end of their quest, where they should be getting to celebrate, and you should be right there with them, suddenly, you are forcibly divided from that character, because they are getting healed, and they are now able-bodied, and you are still disabled. You are still in pain. You still have to get someone to help you do things that you might find embarrassing to talk about on the internet. Maybe other people don't have that, but like, you are looking at this character who you've just been on this huge journey with, and you are thinking, I don't get that. When you close that book or turn off that movie or whatever it is, I talk about books because I write books. When you close that book at the end, you don't get that light feeling in your chest that a lot of able-bodied people get when they read a curing narrative, right? You don't get that like, oh, everything's better now. You get landed back in your disabled body and in your disabled situation with the things that you need help with, and with the way that your body reacts to things, and with the pain that you might have. And you're looking at this narrative that was supposed to make you feel like you could accomplish anything, as it were. And you're thinking, well, I'm not gonna get cured, because that's not an option. Well, I don't have that happy ending. Do I not get a happy ending? And like, there's a lot of anger that can be triggered by a curing narrative. And for some people, a curing narrative is the dream. It's the fantasy, right? If you're just good enough, some magic wand will wave and you will be healed. Or while on the process of doing a quest, you might find a magic potion, or you might stumble across a restorative chamber and you will be healed. Or like, you could go on a quest for a cure and actually find it, right? All of these things for some people are the dream. They are the fantasy, and they want to see it played out in whatever capacity, in whatever format. And it's really difficult because these two things are obviously in direct opposition to one another. In a very similar way to, and I'm talking about queer characters because I have a whole series called How to Write LGBT Characters and Why You Should Anyway. But in the similar way to how, for some people, having a really androgynous looking non-binary character can be really empowering because they're an androgynous person who is non-binary, or they want to look more androgynous and are non-binary, or, you know, that's the reality or the dream. And for other people, it can be really invalidating because, well, that's not what they look like. And why do all non-binary people in fiction have to fucking look like that, right? And like, I'll be honest, I land in the androgyny camp for that. But I recognize that not everybody else does. And these two things are, again, in direct conflict. And there are so many pieces like that. Like, there are so many people who want to read about the strong Black women, who are Black women, obviously. That's the relevant part here. There are so many Black women who want to read about the strong Black women. And there are so many Black women who don't want another strong Black woman narrative. They want a Black woman who's allowed to grow her hair out and be soft for a change. These things are in direct contradiction with one another. How do you handle both of these things? Well, try to be clear about what you're offering. If you are doing a curative narrative, be cautious about it. Make it really clear why that's the narrative you're doing. Make it really clear from the very beginning that this is something the character wants, and that it is theoretically possible in the world you have built. Because then it will be less painful. I won't lie, I've read narratives and really enjoyed narratives where a character with chronic pain gets healed. My favourites of those are the ones where it's an ongoing treatment plan, not a magic, drink this potion and you'll be good forever. I've read them and I've really enjoyed them because the character wants that from the get-go. We have whole conversations about it. They're, daunted by the prospect of what would my life look like without this piece of it. I don't know how to exist in a body that doesn't feel like this. I never have. But let's give it a shot, and if I don't like it, we just stop doing the treatment plan, right? And that's quite an empowering curative narrative because all of the power is in the hands of the character. And I think that is really the solution to a curative narrative, is putting as much power in the hands of the character as humanly or inhumanly possible. My next point on my list, I cannot believe how long this is taking, I'm so glad I split this video into two, is if you're going to include ableism for any reason, and that is at your discretion, and I understand, and I have said in previous How to Write LGBT Characters and Why You Should Anyway that I didn't understand why people didn't include, queerphobia. And now I have a better understanding of that because I'm older and I've talked to more people and I get it now. I'm still not going to give you advice on how to do it. Ditto ableism. If you want to include it for whatever reason, that's at your discretion. I highly recommend including a content warning because it's useful and it allows for people like me to not read it if they don't want to. Because sometimes you don't want to read ableism in your book. You just want to read a book with a disabled character who doesn't have to face any ableism. Which, by the way, is what I write. I think I'll admit you can get a real understanding of where exactly I'm coming from a lot of this stuff, like my personal preferences, by the books that I write, because I don't tend to include ableism and I don't tend to include cures and I don't tend to include like the things that I don't like because I don't like it, so I'm not going to write it. But all of my books have disabled characters. And by the way, if you don't know anything about my books, all the links you need to find out more are in the description box below. Did I say that already? I can't remember because I've made 2 videos back to back. Either way, it's very nice to like and subscribe buttons if you feel like sticking around. My next point is when it comes to disabled villains, be cautious. Much like what I talked about with queer villains, I am going to make a lot of these comparisons, by the way. Much like what I said when it came to queer villains, it's a trope that has existed for a long time. It is quite damaging in the same way that, like, if you're good enough, you'll be cured. And if you're not cured, that means you weren't good enough. It's quite damaging to only see disabled characters as villains. It's very damaging to only see people with, like, facial differences and limb differences as villains, particularly. But in general, we do see a lot of disabled villains and a lot of characters who are villains because of their disability. Like, it's not an incidental cross comparison. It's not they're casually disabled and also they're a villain. A lot of the time, the disability is the cause of their villainy, especially if they're on a quest for a cure at the, like, detriment of wider society or whatever. I'm actually going to use a Batman villain for this. Mr. Freeze. His cure is for his wife, who is dying. But he is a villain because he has a disabled person he cares for. And he is looking for a cure. That's a fairly damaging narrative for disabled people and the people who care for us. And again, it's not like you can never have a disabled villain, just like I'm not saying you can never have a queer villain, but it's very helpful to balance them out against a disabled hero. Whether that is part of your core main cast or a side character who is on the side of the good guys, it's very beneficial to have someone who has a similar disability existing in a positive space. Just be cautious, be careful, be kind about it. I'm not saying you can never, ever, 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 ever write a disabled villain, or even that you can never, ever, ever write the disability as the cause of their villainy. But it's difficult to do it well, and you are building on a foundation that exists that has perpetuated this stereotype for a long time, which makes it even more dangerous to do. You don't have to be out as disabled or be disabled to write disabled characters. Much like I've said with pretty much every other video that I've made in this kind of vein, you don't have to be the marginalization of your character to be able to write them, or to be able to write them well. Yes, you are fundamentally going to miss things if you don't have the lived experience. But I only have the lived experience of existing in a disabled body, being trans, being bi, all of the other, being, white British, all of the other things that exist about me, all of the other character traits that I have, and the, like, pieces that make me up. I only have the experience of existing this way, right? Just like you, single person watching this. Only, like, one singular person, I don't think you're married. You, single person watching this, you only have the experience of being you. But if you can write a lot of different stories from a lot of different perspectives, and you can come up with characters who are elves, goblins, aliens, and, I don't know, an animate sword, you can probably use the same kind of logic to write people who have marginalized identities that exist in the world around us on the page, including disability. You don't have to be disabled. You don't have to know any disabled people to be able to write an effective disabled character. You just need to do your research. And doing your research looks like, I've said this in the last video, but I'll say it again because I think it's relevant and important and worth reiterating. When you're doing your research, you want to look not just at medical stuff, but also at lived experiences of people with the conditions that you are writing about, and with conditions that are similar to the one you're writing about. So, like, when you are trying to write, whether you're writing a made-up condition or a real condition, if you're looking at writing a character with a lung condition, you can look at different lung conditions like COPD and asthma, and I can't think of any other lung conditions right now, but you see my point. If you're writing about a character who has a gut problem, you can research inflammatory bowel disease and colitis and IBS and maybe even like endometriosis and PCOS, because those can affect your digestive system, or like hypermobility, because hypermobility affects your connective tissue and that can affect your digestive system because it's digestive system because it's connective tissue, and so on and so forth. Like there's lots of crossover pieces. You can also look at lots of different people's accounts of, like, some people like me don't want to talk about what disability they have, but some people are willing to talk about like some of the symptoms they experience or the ways that their disability affects them in the world. Like there is an influencer who uses the username Disabled Eliza, and they talk a lot about accessibility issues, and that like their page could be a great resource. Chronically Jenny, on the other hand, who also has a disability, talks about specifically what she's got and how it affects her and the ways that that influences how she interacts with the world. And they both make, Disabled Eliza and Chronically Jenny both make very similar pieces of content about accessibility and the impact of disability and the way that the world responds to you and all of that kind of stuff. But one of them comes from the perspective of being open and willing to disclose medical stuff, and the other one doesn't. And that's, you can still look at both of these sources as great, well, resources, despite the fact that one of them isn't willing to share a diagnosis, right? Like, and they're both sharing firsthand experience of existing in the world, or in the UK specifically, with a disability. And like, there are lots of people, that, not just those two people, they're just two people off the top of my head, but like, there are lots of other people who do very similar pieces of content and do very similar explanations of what it's like to live in a place with a condition and how that impacts and affects and so on and so forth. So, you know, doing your research is the solution. Knowing that you're going to miss stuff is really normal. Like, inevitably you're going to miss things from the perspective, like if you're writing from a perspective that you don't have. Like when I was younger, I tried to write fan fiction that was set in an American school system. Why I did this, I don't know. I've never been in an American school system. I've never been to the Americas. But I tried to write it because I think it was because everybody else was writing the American school system, because a lot of the people writing fan fiction are in English are American, because that's how statistics work. And I didn't know what I was doing, and I definitely messed that up. Like, I've never been to a school that has bells, for example. Like, there was no bell to signify the end of class. The only time a bell ever went off in any of my schools was when it was the fire alarm, right? So I don't know what it's like to have class end with a bell. I don't know what it's like to call it a semester. I don't know what it's like to have an American summer holiday, because I don't actually know when that happens. I know a lot about the Scottish school system and the English school system, and that's it. So inevitably, if I'm not writing about those two things, if I'm writing a school narrative, which I'm probably not going to do, but those would be the school systems that I would situate myself in, because they're the ones I understand the best, or I would do a lot of research and inevitably miss some of the nuances of a school system that I'm not familiar with. Like, I'm not going to specify which fandom it is, because, but there was a big school-based fandom for a long time. In all likelihood, the thing that just came to mind is probably it, but we're not going to name it because of the author being a truly atrociously terrible person. And again, I'm not specifying or naming names, but it's probably the thing that came to mind. But it was set in a British school system, in a British private school system, right? My mum used to work at a British private school with a very similar system, though no boarding, which it does have in the book. And in a really old building and so on and so forth. Like, I went to school in an A-listed building, which means you can't do anything to it because it's historically relevant. That was my high school, right? I'm not going to say what it was or where it was or anything like that. But like, these two pieces allow me a very clear understanding of what a British private school with houses would look like, and then reading fan fiction that crosses over with that, because I wasn't really part of the fandom anyway, but like reading fan fiction that crosses over with that sets characters from one thing into this specific school system from Americans, and they're missing lots of pieces of it. They're putting bells in it. It's like, I've never known a British school in my life, and I've worked in a fair few that has a bell. It's just not a thing that we do over here. And like calling it a semester instead of a term, and having the holidays be, I'm just going to call it wrong because they're wrong for the British school system. And inevitably, it's just a thing. People are extrapolating their own experiences onto something. But if that can be so clearly missed as an opportunity, like so wrong and wonky compared to the reality of the situation, and nobody really minds except pedantic little British kids, then it's okay to mess it up sometimes. It's okay to get a couple of things wrong, especially if you're coming at it from a really genuine place, right? And if you're coming at it from the perspective where if somebody came to you and said, hey, you keep using a slur because you keep using the word cripple, and you said, what? Oh no, I had no idea that was a slur. You can then take it out. You can apologize. You can try and get it taken out of the narrative. You can make the point that you're going to use a different word from now on. Could anybody advise you potentially what a better word to use would be? The answer is disabled. Like, if you're coming at it from the genuine perspective of wanting to write it well, it is easier to write it well. And if you pre-acknowledge that you're going to miss some stuff, you're going to get some stuff wrong, because that's just the nature of it, and everybody's experience with disability is different, then you can do a good job, even if you've never experienced being disabled yourself. And like I've said with how to write LGBT characters and why you should anyway, you can always start small. You don't have to jump straight in with a main character with a massive, complicated disability. You can start small with a character who has, I don't know, a disability that you feel confident portraying. You still need to do your research, you still need to put the work in, but you could do it with a side character to begin with, then maybe bump up after a couple of side characters to including like a core cast member, maybe not the main character, maybe not even like the main 5-man band or whatever, but a core cast member, like a mentor or like a, I don't know, a best friend or a roommate who is really important, but not in the main band of people going on the quest. And then from there, you can include someone going on the quest. And like, again, it doesn't have to be the captain or the pilot or the chief engineer, but it can be like the second in command or the chef or the doctor who stays on the ship all the time. And again, you can just keep building as far as you want up to the potential of a main character with a disability. I will remind, as I so often do, I'm not making any demands here. I'm not saying you must write a disabled character, you must have a disabled main character. I'm saying, if you would like to write disabled characters, here's some advice. Here are some of the perils, pitfalls. Here are some of the ways you can do a good job. Here are some of the ways that other people have done good jobs and bad jobs. Here are some examples that it could be really beneficial for you to look at as examples to base your own creation off. And I hope that it has been helpful in the grand pursuit of you potentially wanting to write a disabled character. I love reading books with disabled characters in. I mean, I say that. I'm not going to be there like, I love every book I've ever read with a disabled character in. For example, I'm actually going to name a book that I didn't like, which I very rarely do because I don't like to name and shame. Like, I don't want to be there like, this is all the things wrong with it, and this is the book, and this is it. That's not what I'm doing here. I personally did not like God Killer by Hannah Kada, I think. Oh my gosh, I should have looked this up. if I've done that wrong, I'll put it in the description box below. If I've done it right, it won't be there. I didn't like Godkiller, personally. I didn't like the narrative style. It's just not my vibe. It's not for me. Because happenstance, them's the shakes. I just didn't like it, right? My wife loves the book. It's a good book. I'm not trying to say that it's a bad book. This is my point. I'm not saying it's a bad book. I don't think it's a bad book. It's just not for me, right? That happens. Everybody has preferences. And I know that the main character in that has a disability, right? And as far as I've heard, it's written very well. So I'm not trying to pretend like I would love every single book with a disabled character in it. And I do love finding books with disabled characters in them. I love it when disabled characters just get to go on the quest and explore space. And if you can facilitate that, there is a whole community of people who are very likely to love that fact. I cannot begin to tell you the amount of conversations I've had with people when I go to in-person events where I'm sitting behind a table selling my books, and people have come over because I have a disability flag on my stall, and then they're like, ooh, do you have disabled characters in your books? What are they about? And the excitement is unparalleled. It's not actually unparalleled. It's about parallel with people being there like, that's a non-binary flag. Do you have non-binary characters? And I'm like, all of them have non-binary characters. And the excitement there is very parallelable to the excitement of finding out that they all have disabled characters who are just going on quests and exploring space. Because in the grand scheme of things, as a disabled person, it gets quite boring to have to read yet another book about coming to terms with your disability. I'm not saying those books are bad by themselves, in and of themselves. I'm not saying that there's never a space for that. And sometimes you don't want to read that. In the same way that you don't want every queer book to be a book about coming out, right? Sometimes you just want to have some queer people exist in the world where the world knows they're queer and it's fine. And it's the same concept. Sometimes we just want to exist. And that's everything I have to say for these 2 videos on how to write disabled characters and why you should anyway. If you have any specific questions about how to write disabled characters and why you should anyway, please do let me know. I'm not here to give like specific, I want to write a character with this disability and this, like that kind of a question is not something that I am currently in a position to be able to answer. But if you have more general questions, I will see what I can do. If I get a lot of questions, I might make a 3rd part to this whole extravaganza. I mean, I might make more parts anyway, because I might come up with more things I want to talk about. But like, let me know if you have any questions, is what I'm saying. And again, if you want to read my books and use those as examples of well-written disabled characters, I don't know. If like, I don't want to toot my own horn too much and be there like, they're excellent examples, but like, if you want to use them as examples of disabled characters, all the links you need are in the description box below, right next to the like and subscribe button, if this has convinced you to stick around. Next time, in 2 weeks, I will hopefully be bringing you my works in progress video, which I do every single year, where I talk about what's been published, what's on the radar of publishing, and what is coming at some point in the future, what I have been working on. And from there, I've got no idea. I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Bye.